Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host,
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support in our recent content, and before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, we are here. It is July, and the Summer League is almost upon us, right? Now, we do plan on going to the Las Vegas Summer League, so we'll probably hook you guys up or hook everyone up with some potential updates, and we'll talk about that in our upcoming episodes and whatnot. But free agency NBA offseason is still going around. We've still had a number of moves. We've had a few things happen, I believe, since the last time that we did record. Of course, if you want to know the thoughts on all of our previous takes about all the different acquisitions as of late, you can check our last couple of episodes. Of course, include stuff like, say, the moves that Houston made, right? The moves that Denver made, DeAndre Ayton and Jake LaRavia going to the Lakers. We pretty much covered, like I said, the vast majority of moves that have occurred up to this point. But there's still some stuff left going on. So as of right now, it sounds like, according to Mark Stein and others, that Bradley Beal, right, he's on the Suns, still has a couple of years left on his contract, kind of like Dame, right? But there's a lot of rumors going around about the fact that he's probably going to get bought out, and that there are a handful of teams that are interested in signing him should he get bought out, right? And that includes the Clippers, the Lakers, as well as the Bucks. And I think there are a couple other teams as well that were on that list. The Nuggets were also on that list as well. But a lot of people seem like that they're leaning towards he's going to go to the Clippers, right? So we'll see if and when that officially happens. But, what do you think? As a guy, right, where he used to be on your favorite team, right? Now he's elsewhere, right? So you know him pretty well. What do you think of where you think he should go, and whether or not, if he does go to a team like the Clippers or elsewhere, what do you think?
Right. I think we got to diagnose, what the best version of Beal kind of looks like, right? If you want him to be a number two, then I think you'd have to look at, the years where John Wall was kind of the focal point of the Wizards offense, right? And Beal really thrived, being able to play off the ball. But I feel like that aspect of his game kind of left him a little bit once he became the franchise player or whatever. And then he was definitely more ball dominant, right? Averaging 30 plus points, on some mediocre, if not borderline garbage teams, right? But I think, in today's league, he could easily be a number two as long as there's not enough, or as long as there's enough ball to go around, right? Like KD and Book, that's already, a tough situation to kind of fit yourself into, especially if you're a scorer like Beal, right? Because that's what he is at the end of the day. His best, attribute is scoring. It's not defense, it's not passing, it's not rebounding, it's scoring. So, to be able to, for him to be able to be like a efficient 3-level scorer, you're going to need to kind of be careful, I think, who you pair him with. And like you said, the Clippers make sense, right? Because he can be that over-the-top scoring punch that they kind of desperately need, if Kawhi is going to be out, with health issues, or if Harden's having a bad night, right? But that was kind of the same logic that I think we came into, Phoenix with, right? Where we were like, yeah, he could be the perfect guy to pick up the slack, I guess, if KD and Booker are having an off night. But that didn't really come to fruition. So I do like the Clippers destination, though, but Miami would be my personal favorite. There's been rumblings of that for years, going back to when Beal didn't even have the contract that he has right now. So there's always been that, I think, mutual interest between those two. I know Lakers was a thing, but I think it's kind of tapered off. But I think I wouldn't be mad at the Clippers. Bucks, I wouldn't really like that because it's going to probably be the same thing that Dame encountered, right? It's not a strong defensive guard. Can put up, monstrous performances, but what does that look like when they're the number two?
Yeah, I mean, last year he averaged 17, 3 and 4, right? Just under 50 from the field, 39 from 3. But again, one of the issues also is he doesn't play consistently, right? He's basically played about 50 games or so the last 3 seasons, right? In 21-22, which was a shortened season, right? 72 games. He played 40 games.
Yep.
Right? So the last time that he was like a relatively durable guy was pretty much before COVID, right? That's the last time that he was like relatively somewhere around 60-something games or so pretty consistently. Since then, he's been pretty banged up. The thing with the Clippers is where it feels like that there's where a lot of the smoke started to continue to occur is that they also made a trade, right? Where they ended up doing a 3-team deal where they ended up trading Norman Powell to the Miami Heat, and then the Miami Heat ended up sending Kyle Anderson and Kevin Love over to the Utah Jazz, and the Utah Jazz ended up trading John Collins to the Clippers, right? So now that's a guy that at different points we've liked as a player, right? And now he goes to the Clippers, presumably to play the 4 next to Zubac, maybe potentially could be some small ball 5. Um, they still have about 5.5 or so million of MLE money left because they used some of it for Brook Lopez. So they still have enough to get Bradley Beal, I guess, at that amount. If he gets bought out, I don't know how much he would be giving up. But if they did get Bradley Beal, that'd be a pretty nice offseason for them, right? Because you re-sign and bring back James Harden. You add Brook Lopez. You trade for John Collins, right? And then I guess, you send out Norman Powell, but you replace him with Beal. Right now, I guess Powell had a better season than Bradley Beal last
Mhm,
year for
mhm.
sure, right? I mean, he was one of the 2, 3 best guys on the team for most of the year.
Yeah, pretty
Just
much.
didn't work as well in the playoffs. But the other issue is he is on an expiring contract, and I'm going to assume they did not want to pay him a long-term deal, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they want to keep their cap space open. And it's also just like, how much worse is Bradley Beal from Norman Powell, right? Like, is it that much of a drop off to where you could be like, yeah, we'll be okay. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
especially like if you get John Collins, then you kind of reshape the structure of the team where now you have more front court size with him and Lopez. And then you have Beal. Now, of course, there's still durability questions, right? Because their best player, Kawhi, doesn't consistently play every other game, right? He's not a guy that plays 65 plus games consistently. And
Right.
then, Beal doesn't really do that either. But they were able to get by during the regular season anyway. So if they were able to do all of that, like I said, that'd be a kind of a home run type offseason where I think you could make a pretty strong case that they're better than they were last year. And then you could put them potentially in that upper tier if you want, or maybe you feel like they're right underneath, but they could challenge a lot of those, really good teams. Like if you don't feel like they're in the upper tier with these moves, right? Like they did push the Nuggets to 7 games, right? Who also pushed the Oklahoma City Thunder to 7 games. Again, I think you'd have to bank on them being healthy for 4 rounds, which is kind of a tough case to make
Mhm.
for them. Of course, they could, but it's not necessarily a safe pick for me if you were trying to pick a team that you could say will win the West. But they could potentially, but they would still have to go through all those other teams, and then the other teams: Lakers, Warriors, Bucks. According to the Athletic, some people have also mentioned the Wolves, although that didn't come from the Athletic. I mean, like you mentioned with the Bucks, I mean, you're in the East, so I guess that's nice, and they, I guess, in theory, right, could use another playmaking guard. They do have a lot of other guards, right? Because I mean, they brought back Ryan Rollins, they brought back Kevin Porter Jr., they brought back Gary Trent Jr., and then I guess Torian Prince is kind of like a swing guy.
Mhm.
But and then they still have Andre Jackson Jr., who just doesn't really play that much, so maybe that just doesn't count. But that could run into, like you said, the same issues for with Phoenix. Although I guess Phoenix didn't have a Giannis, and then I guess they didn't have a Miles Turner type big either, so that would help. So wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. But fit wise, you can see why the Clippers for him probably make the most sense. Lakers, the issue there is that is he going to start? I mean that would kind of be the issue there. He's not going to be able to start over Luca, and probably wouldn't be starting over Austin Reeves, right? It would like some people have made the case, well maybe you trade Austin, and then that way you can bring in Bradley Beal. But I think that would not be a wise decision in my
Yeah,
opinion.
I
And
agree.
then the Warriors, of course, who's the guard next to Steph that he has to try to compete for a starting spot? I guess it'd be Pods, but and he could beat him out, I think. But just as a whole, I
Yeah,
think the
no
Clippers.
question.
Yeah, I think the Clippers make the most sense, and honestly, I think would probably have a better chance to go further than most of those other teams. Because
I would agree.
even a team like Golden State, we'll probably talk about them since we're we're in this offseason chatter, right? But even for a team like Golden State, as of right now, they haven't really made any moves other than the draft. It seems like they're kind of waiting to figure out what happens with this Kuminga thing, right? Most people seem like maybe by the time the Vegas Summer League ends, there'll be some type of resolution, whether it's a sign and trade, whether or not he signs an extension or takes the qualifying offer. So they have to figure out other stuff too. And it seems like that they have a couple of guys that are kind of just waiting, right? Like most people point that Horford's probably going to go there, assuming he doesn't retire. And then DeAnthony Melton, who for a while, right, seemed like he was a favorite to go to LA. Now it seems like most people think he's a favorite to go back to Golden State, which he already was in. So they're, I guess, kind of waiting for that. Maybe they'll split their MLE. I don't know. But, we'll see what happens with Bradley Beal. I guess with all of that said, it sounds like it's almost a certainty that he gets bought out. And if
Yeah.
you're the Suns, that'd be kind of a rough way to end, that era, right? Where 4 seasons ago, right, they went to the NBA Finals with that previous core. Then, right, they have the 64-win season, get smashed by Dallas in the second round. Then the first year we did the podcast, right, then they ended up trading for Kevin Durant. Then they lose in the second round. Then they break it up even more because Chris Paul, he's moved out. That's okay because of his age. And then you move DeAndre Ayton out, but you don't really replace him, right? It's like, Yusuf Nurkic, Grayson Allen. We didn't like the trade at the time. Looked fine in the regular season and then was a disaster in the postseason. Now Durant's gone, right? And you got back Jalen Green and Dylan Brooks. And then you did, get Mark Williams and Kaman Maluak in the draft along with a couple other players. But then you're also going to probably have to buy out or waive and stretch or whatever it's going to be with Beal. And, that would be, like I said, a pretty rough spot to be in. And they still don't have their picks. So not only did it not work, it really didn't work. And they're probably going to be in a really tough spot. But, I guess for Beal and Durant, you got rid of those guys, and I guess they'll be going to better places. So it's kind of a win-win, but not really.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I feel like the Phoenix Suns, they're a mess, but I think they're slowly, breaking out of it, right? I think they had a good draft, relatively good, I guess return for KD, but even then, I don't know. It depends on how you look at it and what your outlook is on it, but yeah, I think they're trending in a better direction, but this was completely unnecessary. You didn't really need to gut the entire team, just really make some significant upgrades. But yeah, I think the consensus is the Booker, Beal, KD trio just didn't work, unfortunately.
Yeah. The other guy who's kind of waiting and I guess while all these teams are kind of figuring out what to do is Chris Paul's another guy, right? He's still a free agent along with Russell Westbrook. But with Chris Paul, there's at least been a little bit more solid reporting about where he might go. Sounds like most people expect him to go to either the Clippers or the Suns, right? Now, if he goes to the Clippers with Bradley Beal, like I said, that'd be a continued home run stretch of signings, right? Because then you got depth in the backcourt, you got depth in the front court with your stars. And that'd be, like I said, I think a surprisingly good offseason because I think when we talked about the Clippers after they got eliminated, not that we thought they were bad or that they were completely cooked, but I don't think we didn't really expect them to probably make moves to be better. I think we were just kind of under the assumption that they would just run it back. But instead of doing that, right, they've actually kind of, like I said, shifted the roster. Is there a spot that you'd like Chris Paul to go to other than those two teams? Because there's been like other teams that have been mentioned, but they don't think it's as likely. Like they've mentioned Milwaukee, they've continued to mention the Lakers, but most people expect him to go to one of those two teams.
Yeah, I think the Clippers is amazing. I like that one the most. The Lakers is intriguing as well. I would like to kind of see them, get a facilitator off the bench, but I think the Clippers makes the most sense, right? It would be a homecoming, mutually, right? And yeah, like you said, it just really kind of would add a lot of depth that they desperately need.
Yeah, and then Russell Westbrook also unsigned. We're just kind of waiting to see what happens with him because there were a couple of destinations that people thought he might go to, but then the situation's changed, right? Like for the Knicks, he was rumored to potentially go there. They ended up getting Jordan Clarkson in the buyout market, and then they also gave their exception level money to Gorshan Yabusele, right, from Philly. And then for the Kings, they were also expected to be a potential other destination for him, but they ended up signing Dennis Schroeder in free agency. I believe it was a sign and trade, right? So I think they ended up using the exception or whatever that came from the Kevin Herter deal. So they just kind of absorbed him using their exception. And I guess they could still sign Westbrook if they wanted to. I still wouldn't really understand it, but I guess they could. And then another one, according to Brett Siegel of the Clutch Points, is also the Milwaukee Bucks have opened up as a potential destination because they need a guard. And if Chris Paul goes to the Clippers, and then and then Bradley Beal goes to the Clippers, right? Then you kind of need another guard. And outside of like a Malcolm Brogdon or other guys who could get bought out but haven't gotten bought out yet because they're still on the roster, um, we don't know. So what do you think in terms of a Russell Westbrook location?
Yeah, that's a tough one because I mean at this point we already know that he's going to be coming off the bench. The Bucks one, I think that one is fine, right? Because they're going to need more depth, right? They don't really have a lot of serious options beyond their starters at this point, right? So I that would be kind of cool. It is unfortunate that a lot of the teams kind of just really have no interest or whatever, right? Like I think the Knicks one, that was one that they said that they didn't have interest, but
Right.
Timberwolves, that could be kind of interesting potentially, right?
Yeah, I guess.
Because like you probably don't want Mike Conley around as much anymore, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Wolves weren't mentioned as a team for him. Malcolm Brogdon was mentioned as a potential Minnesota guy, but
Okay.
again, so much of this is really, I think, kind of guys waiting on what's going to happen. And that's kind of one of the things about this free agency, right? Is that like there's a lot of moves that have to happen first before guys can just kind of go places, especially the guys that are like minimum contract signings, because those are the guys that are the lower priority signings. So they kind of have to wait around for those open roster spots and for those other moves to be made. Like I mentioned, with Beal, he's got to get bought out first. Then even after he gets bought out, then he's got to agree to go to the Clippers, and then that could open up. All right, now does Chris Paul go to the Clippers or does he go to the Suns? Does Russell Westbrook go to I don't know, Phoenix or Milwaukee or something like that? Even like I mentioned with Horford and DeAnthony Melton, if they go to Golden State, they got to wait for this Kuminga thing, and this is another situation, right, that we're kind of waiting on with Jonathan Kuminga, right? Where along with a couple other restricted free agents, right? Because he, along with, I believe, what is it, Josh Giddey, and then also Cam Thomas, those are all restricted free agents that just because of the market this year have not been signed to new deals, and they're just kind of waiting it out, right? Like Josh Giddey wants 30 million a year. Doesn't seem like the Bulls really want to give it to him. I think for understandable reasons.
Right.
Cam Thomas, I don't think that there's a report about how much he's looking for, but if he feels like, hey, I'm worth like the typical rookie max extension, whichever that is, I think the Nets feel like we don't think you're worth it, right? And then same with Kuminga, right? We know that Kuminga was looking for a max deal even as early as last offseason, right? But he hasn't gotten it, and the Warriors clearly don't think he's worth it. And it doesn't seem like other teams think he's worth it either, which is understandable just because, again, I don't think any of those guys are max players
Mm-hmm.
necessarily. And their current teams really have most, if not all, of the leverage because if those guys just wait it out, then the only other option is the qualifying offer, which, if you take the qualifying offer, I guess you could end up entering free agency, but or unrestricted free agency. But then the issue there is that if you don't have a great year, then you might have potentially messed up and screwed yourself out of, a bunch of money, right? So it just kind of depends. It's always a gamble, which is why you don't usually see guys take the qualifying offer because, like I said, it's such a huge gamble. And if it doesn't pay off, you're in real trouble. But this just happens to be a year where not very many teams have cap space. And those guys just happen to be, victims, I guess, of that, whatever word you want to use. Maybe that's a poor choice of words, but just as a whole, um, what the heck do we think happens with those situations? Like, my guess is that Giddy probably resigns with Chicago, but maybe it's not 30 million a year. Cam Thomas, I don't know. My guess is kind of a similar thing. But then Kuminga is the one that everybody seems to assume is going to get signed and traded. But in terms of the rumored potential situations he could go to, right? Like there was a lot of smoke about the Kings. But if you heard about the Kings offer that was reported, that, that they offered at Golden State clearly didn't want to do that, right? Well, it was like, whoa, Dario Saric and Devin Carter uh,
Yep.
for Jonathan Kuminga, which if you're the Warriors, yeah, that's the type of deal where you may not even say no. You just hang up and then just don't
Really
call
no.
back.
Yeah.
Or don't take their calls anymore. But I don't know what happens with that situation because, like I said, my expectation might have been that maybe he gets forced into signing and then, uh, they go into the season and then they figure out what to do with them at the deadline. But that also has its own issues as well, right? So a sign and trade probably would be the most beneficial. Some people think it's the most likely, but it may be something that may take a minute, right? And some people think it could be after Summer League because everybody always says, hey, in Vegas for the Summer League, every team, goes down to Vegas to meet and talk and figure out what deals to make. But then usually deals don't get done right after the Summer League. But either way, maybe it happens. But what do you think of these restricted free agent situations?
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of wild, and I agree with you in terms of like the Josh Giddey, situation with him, needing to be paid, right? And then Cam Thomas as well. I think both those guys will probably end up re-signing, just maybe, not the exact number that they were probably looking for. But like you said, the Kuminga one is wild because, like you said, we all kind of know that he's probably not worth the max money. Um, and I really don't know what they do from there. I was a big advocate for a sign and trade, and I think that's what's still going to happen. I just don't think that there's much of a relationship there on both sides. Like, there's no trust. So I think he's just going to go somewhere else. I don't know where, though. I know some people were talking about the Bucks. I was like, I don't know how that would work, but it it might take a long time.
Yeah, a lot of the rumor teams were teams like Chicago, Brooklyn. The Wizards were considered a potential destination, although they've made a couple moves that I guess we can talk about in a moment. And I think that was, and then like you said, the Bucks just randomly came up for whatever reason. But I guess of those teams, do you have, an ideal spot for him? Again, knowing and understanding that at the very least for him, he wants to go to a situation where I think he wants to play a lot, right? Because he feels like, hey, I'm worthy enough of getting a consistent amount of minutes
Yeah.
on an NBA roster. But for Golden State, right, it's tough because we know that the fit really isn't quite there with the other guys on the roster like Draymond and Jimmy Butler. And I guess they just are like, we'd rather just play those guys more so than you, which I can understand. But what do you think of those destinations? Just because, again, like, I don't know if I would say that there's a perfect situation for him, but like say if it's a bad team where you can just go there and put up numbers and play a lot, play consistently, that would probably be the best situation for him. But the Warriors, of course, want to get something back of value, right? So are those teams willing to give up things of value in order to get him? Because as of right now, it seems like the answer is no. Otherwise, this would have been done already, right? Clearly, like teams are not interested in giving up a lot for him.
Yeah. I'm still an advocate for Miami. I think that would be a great fit for them. They need to do something. Um, it wouldn't surprise me if the Wizards pull the trigger on that. It wouldn't surprise me if the Pelicans do as well. The Bulls. Like, I kind of don't mind those areas, too much. I think he has an opportunity to kind of prove himself, but I think Miami we would be the one that I think I'm the most high on, just because I would like the fit of Kaminga being the third option or potential second option, with Tyler Hero and Bam. So
Yeah, and then I guess if you're the Warriors, what is it that you would like to get back from Miami?
yeah, that would be the thing. I have no clue because I don't know. Maybe a pick. Um,
Yeah, because in terms of players, Robinson's gone,
yeah.
and they wouldn't put. I don't think they would put. Well, I know that they wouldn't put Hero or
Mm-mm,
Bam,
mm-mm,
or probably not even Ware in the deal either, right? Like I
mm-mm.
don't think they would give up any of those guys. So it could just be some of the other role players, but several of them, like I said, have either moved or moved on. Like say, you're not getting back Kyle Anderson because he was moved to Utah.
Mhm.
Um, and then I guess Norman Powell. I mean, could you just trade him again to
Good.
Golden State? Maybe. I mean, that could be okay. Wiggins. I mean, I think contractually they would have to sign Kuminga to like a huge offer sheet. From what I understand, because of the poison pill provision, a deal like that is pretty much close to impossible. And Wiggins is in other rumors himself, right? Like
Mhm.
he's been, there's been rumors about him with the Lakers, right? Which if we want, we could talk about that. We don't have to, but either way, yeah. Like I'm assuming that we're not going to get any resolutions to the Kaminga thing, until after Vegas. But even then, like I said, I can't predict where he goes. But it feels more and more likely now that he probably will be signed and traded. But again, what is a team going to give up? Because with Golden State, like, yeah, you could go into next season with Kuminga on the roster. It's not like he's a bad player, but I think you're still going to have the issue of he's not going to get the role that he wants. And, if I'm Golden State, I don't really want to have a player like that on the team because they're trying to win and contend. I don't think they'll win the championship, but at least as of right now, if you can solve this situation, get something back, and then say you bring in Horford and DeAnthony Melton, like those are solid acquisitions that should make them worst case scenario like a good regular season team, right? And then a team that could probably win at least one round in the playoffs. That's what you want, but you can't do that yet until you figure out the Kaminga situation. Because especially depending on the type of contract he signs, if he resigns and then they are above the apron, then I think they lose the exception anyways, which I'm sure they don't want because my guess is, like I said, they probably have some type of implicit agreement with those guys since that's been mentioned that those guys are very likely to go there. But we'll see. Would you like both of those additions?
Um, yeah, I'd be fine with it. I wouldn't have a problem with any of those guys. I think they would kind of fit in seamlessly.
Yeah, for sure. Um, let's mention the Wizards as well because they've actually made a few moves since the last time we recorded as well. First off, they ended up trading for Cam Whitmore from the Houston Rockets, right, for two future second round picks.
Mhm.
If I'm not, yeah, exactly,
Mhm.
yeah, for two future second round picks. And then the other day, they also ended up flipping Kelly Olynyk after getting him from New Orleans in the pool deal. They flipped him to the San Antonio Spurs for Malachi Branham, as well as Blake Wesley, and a future second round pick as well. So basically, if you're the Wizards, you got Cam Whitmore, Blake Wesley, Malachi Branham, and three future second round picks, right, in exchange for, I guess, Kelly Olynyk. So, I mean, if you're the Wizards, that continues to be some solid acquisitions there. You do kind of wonder, at least with the Spurs one, could it be too many young guys added into the mix? But you do get seconds. So, worst case scenario, you can flip some guys later and then maybe bring in some other guys. And at the very least, for Cam Whitmore, we know and understand that according to Raphael Stone for the Rockets, his thought process is we don't see ourselves as a developmental team right now. Now they see themselves as a contender, right? A team that's looking to challenge for the title. And Whitmore didn't really play for Houston last year, and they had to clear roster spots anyways in order to bring in the guys that they were bringing in, right? They waived Jock Landale, and obviously they traded Cam Whitmore. But, at least now going to the Wizards, right? That's a spot where presumably he's going to play and get minutes. We've seen, in the handful of games that he does play and get minutes, he can put up numbers as worst case scenario, a guy who can get hot off the bench, right? He's a really good athlete. He's got some length. Defensively, we'll see. But like if you're the Wizards, you gave up basically nothing to get him. Maybe those second round picks, because they're not the Wizards, they're other teams. Maybe those second round picks could be valuable in the future. But if you're the Wizards, there's nothing wrong with taking a flyer on a young guy who wasn't going to play. And then in the case of Houston, you needed to clear roster spots, and you're bringing in guys who, as of right now, are better players, right?
Yeah.
Like Dorian Finney-Smith and Clint Capella, as of right now, are better players. And so, and you don't really need Cam Whitmore in theory, I guess, on this Houston team. Maybe you might feel like, yeah, we could use some more bench scoring punch, but you do have guys off the bench who can give you some energy. Like Tari Eason presumably will continue to be a 6-man guy. They're going to work Reed Shepard into the rotation, so we'll see what happens there. But either way, I like it for both sides, but mostly for Washington because again, you're getting back a young guy where if he plays well, that's a guy that you're at least going to have for another season or so on a relatively cheap contract. I mean, this was a guy who was projected to be a top 10 pick, and he ended up falling all the way down to 20, and he hasn't played a ton. And there are flashes of good play that you can see in some minutes he plays, and then there's other flashes where it's like, yeah, well, it makes sense why Houston wasn't really set on giving him a ton of minutes. But for a Washington team that's in the midst of a rebuild, it's fine. You know what I mean? Like, since you moved Jordan Poole, you don't, like there'd be plenty of minutes open for Whitmore, even though they have other guards, but some of those guys are veterans and they could get bought out, right? Like Marcus Smart, it's not a lock to continue to be a Wizard the whole season,
Yeah,
among some of the other guys too, since they're
yeah.
on expiring.
Yeah, I think the Wizards have done a good job, right? 2 second-round picks for Cam Whitmore, who has, a ton of upside, a ton of talent, a ton of raw talent. Just kind of needs to be honed on a team that'll give him an opportunity, right? Like he could become one of the league's better, volume scorers. I'm not saying like a superstar or anything, but a good volume shooter. And then I do like, bringing in the other 2 young guys, Malachi Branham and Blake Wesley. I don't really have a problem with that. Flipping Olynyk for that is pretty good as well. So, this team kind of has on the cusp of playing written on it, in terms of, if the young guys, progress and, it depends on, I think, what Trey Johnson looks like as a rookie. So, but I like the fact that they've brought in, some serious vets, in this offseason while also, strengthening the core of the roster and making it young and keeping it young, because at the heart of it, that's what it needs to be. It needs to be a young, hungry, rebuilding team, and I think they've done a good job in terms of bringing in more pieces that match that going back to the offseason or midseason, excuse me, right? Like
Yeah,
you bring in AJ Johnson, who is another guy, ton of potential, just kind of needs to be honed, and then similar thing with Cam Whitmore. So shout out to the Wizards.
yeah, and at least with Olynyk, going to the Spurs, right? That's a guy who could potentially be another front court guy for them, right? And he's a guy that can stretch the floor, right? Unlike say like a Luke Cornett, So now they've kind of added some additional size, another veteran that could give them some potential production. So decent work by the Spurs as well. And it's kind of funny where say with Luke Cornett, right? Since the moratorium period has ended, right, and they actually now are able to report a lot more of these contracts, right? The contracts now are kind of looked at a little bit differently from when we first reacted to them in our live stream. Like, say, for Luke Cornett, he signed a 4-year deal. When we were looking at it in the live stream, we're like, oh, wow, 4-year deal? That's kind of a lengthy contract for a guy like Luke Cornett. But then when they put the actual details out, you'll see, oh, only the first 2 years are fully guaranteed. And then after that, like third year's a partial guarantee, fourth year's like an option or something like that. Same thing with like a Dorian Finney-Smith, right? Where we're like, oh, wow, a 4-year deal until he's about 35, 36. That's kind of a lengthy deal. But then again, first 2 years fully guaranteed, and then the third year partial guarantee, fourth year team option, which if that's the case, makes you wonder, right? That seems like a lot of the reporting about the negotiations in LA that went very poorly clearly seemed very legit, right?
Yeah.
Many people have talked about that, including, like I said, people like Anthony Irwin and Zach Lowe and others, where the negotiations for those guys were bungled.
Yeah.
Some other players, again, similar type of deal, but it is kind of funny where it almost feels like some of these teams are now kind of figuring out, all right, this is how the apron works. This is the type of stuff that we're going to have to do. And again, it could just be this one particular offseason where no teams have cap space and, there's not a lot of great options on the market, right? Like, say, next offseason, a bunch of teams are supposed to have cap space. So maybe that could completely change things, right? The Lakers, seems like they have a plan for 2027 where they're going to try to get guys like Jokic or Giannis. Don't know if that's going to happen. I would probably lean towards it being less likely. I don't think their Project 2027 plan will be a success, but either way, a lot of these teams are seemingly vying for having a lot of flexibility, which I think is which is a good thing. Now, again, is it as beneficial for the player? Maybe not necessarily, but for the team, right, that's looking out for themselves, those are really good deals. But um, I guess, have you seen the over unders? Obviously we'll do that once we get into the offseason. Have you seen like the over unders for a lot of these teams? Because I know you mentioned the Wizards, right, where you were kind of like this could be like a play-in team uh next season. Or not that they're gonna be in the play-in, but you're saying like the best case scenario could be, oh, they could get close to a play-in team. Like they
Yeah.
could be like 11th or 12th
Y-
or
y-
something like that.
Yeah, I was thinking more like on the cusp of it, right? Like you
Mhm.
would be able to see the potential, of some of the young guys and the veteran leadership as well. Kind of similar to like what OKC was, when they first were in the
Yeah.
plane, kind of like that.
Right now, as I just looked, the Wizards over under is 20.5. So
I think they'll get over them. I
I
think they're
could
getting
see
over that.
I could see some people putting over, and I think they could get over. How much more could they get over 20 games? What did they do? What did they do this season?
I think it was either 17 or 18.
Yeah, so 3 games better in an Eastern Conference that's probably going to be a little bit worse. Although, how much better did they get? I mean, I don't know, but either way, like that could be doable. I would say that's doable.
Yeah, I think they'll win 20.
Yeah, so highest over under is Oklahoma City with 62.5, right? Which is interesting because that's, lower than what they did this past season where they won 68 games. But either way, we don't have to talk too much about over unders until we get there, which is what we do in the off season with a lot of this stuff. Then I guess last but not least, Summer League. I mean, so far we've had the Utah Salt Lake City Summer League that they usually do, and
Mhm.
also the California Classic. Again, not all of the big name guys have played, but we have seen some, right? We did see VJ Edgecombe, we did see Ace Bailey, right? Those are the second and third picks of the draft, so those guys would be pretty important. We saw some of the other picks in the draft as well that were a little bit in the lower end, but like we also saw guys like Nikola Topic, and we also saw a couple other guys as well. What did you think of those guys so far in the summer?
Yeah, I mean, I I enjoyed VJ Edgecombe, right?
Yeah,
He
he
has
had
a
one game, but in that
yeah,
one game, he looked pretty good.
yeah, he had a really good you know, uh, attitude towards the game, and I think that's what people liked about him, right? Like you could tell he's hungry, you could tell he's passion for it, effort on both ends of the floor. Like you love to see that. Been kind of disappointed with Ace Bailey. I mean, there's been some bright spots, but even then, like
Second game was much better.
yeah, the first game was really really rough. And yeah, I mean, Topic is okay, you know.
Mhm.
Um, Kind of rearing its ugly head on why I really didn't like him. Like what, 3 for 12, 0 for 5 from the three in one of the games, right, or something like that. You know, turn the ball over a lot. So I think the lack of experience and the NBA is a little bit different than overseas now. But I just feel like he's gonna have a tough time adapting. He just needs more reps. But off rip, I can kind of see why I didn't like him initially.
The Heat rookie looked pretty rough.
Oh,
Yakas Jonas,
yeah,
he had a
yeah.
rough.
Similar,
But again,
similar thing.
right. But again, in fairness, right, with the summer league, again, there's all kinds of weird things that happen, right, in terms of like the level of talent is not the same. The supporting casts are not the same. There's certain types of players that normally don't look as great in the summer league. It depends. Like a lot of bigs will look kind of funky in the summer league because you're not necessarily playing with high level playmaking guards. If you're not like that great of an athlete, you're probably going to look pretty rough in the
Hmm.
summer league, I would say as well. But then for some of the second year guys, right? Like sometimes you kind of would expect some of those guys to look a little bit better, right? Because they've already played in the NBA and they've actually gone against NBA level competition. But say like for the Lakers, right? Dalton Connect, he had in his last summer league game, he looked really good. But in the first two, it was kind of a struggle for him, right? And this is a guy, as I already mentioned, this is a player who played in the NBA last year. He's an older rookie, but it didn't look that great for him. And keep in mind, right, his name has kind of been in trade rumors, right, as of right. So like in terms of him, do those performances concern you, or is it more so just you're writing it off because it's summer league?
More so writing it off because it's summer league.
Mhm.
Like you said, it really is. It depends on who you're playing with, right? It's a very very small sample size. We need to kind of see it, in the real big leagues, and then I think we can make kind of a consensus opinion. But right now I think it's just nerves, and the summer league is a different game.
Would you put him in the rumored deals that people have been talking about? Like, say, the one that's been discussed a ton at this point from Jovan Buha, and Anthony Irwin and others about the idea of Andrew Wiggins, right? Where it's supposedly something along the lines of like Rui, Connect, and a first, something along those lines.
Um, Maybe. Um, I mean, I would do it. I would do it. It's actually,
Okay.
yeah, I would do that because it's a direct talent upgrade, and I think you need to. Wiggins has championship experience, and good championship experience at that. So, I would do that for sure.
Yeah, because there's been so many debates and discussions about it. Because a lot of people feel like it's kind of an overpay when you include not just Rui but also Connect in a first. Some people feel like, well, why can't we do you know Rui plus some expiring, right? Like get back Gabe Vincent or get back Maxi Kleba, right, or something like that. Why does it have to be Connect? Or maybe give up the first if you don't give up Connect and then include the expiring, something along those lines. I don't think the Lakers are going to do that at all. I think that they will try to, if they're gonna do it, I think they're gonna try to talk down the price, which is what most teams would do, right?
Yeah,
Like I think
it's
usually
negotiating.
it's not a hot take. What's
Uh,
normally gonna happen is a team like the Heat is gonna be like, hey, you got a guy, we have a guy that you want, but if you want him, you're gonna have to pay. And then the Lakers are gonna be like, well, of course we don't want to do that, right?
yeah,
But they're gonna try to talk it down. I don't know if that's going to happen. I actually think that that would be a good deal for them. Again, is Wiggins the same guy as he was the year they won the title? Maybe not. He's been kind of up and down. I know there's been some personal stuff that had happened. We've talked about that many times
hmm
over the last couple of seasons, right? That was kind of one of the big reasons for his up and down play. But the issue there is just the positional logjam that you have, where you have so many guys who are mostly fours, especially on defense. You kind of need to have a guy balance that out by getting some type of wing. I mean, for them, you have to have some defensive type guys. I don't think you can take them seriously as a real contender without getting some defensive upgrades in there. And whether or not it's Andrew Wiggins or someone else, again, like it depends on perspective. But like I said, I would like to do it. I'd be willing to maybe give up the first, but I wouldn't want to just also throw Connect in there. I think it may be a little too much. But again, if you feel like Wiggins is a real potential upgrade and you think it's worth it, right, then you might as well do it. But I don't think they will, right? Like we've seen them where if they feel like that there's not a that the deal is too much, they just won't do it,
yeah,
right? We've
literally.
seen them not really be willing to throw in stuff, especially in recent years, right? Like we saw them do that before, but looking back, many of those deals didn't work out, right? Dennis Schroeder, Russell Westbrook, they gave up first to do, then they had to use the first to get off of Russ, and now they're at the point where I guess they don't want to use up too many of them, which is kind of bizarre at this point, just considering you're not at the point now where you have an aging core. Now you do have Luca, where it's like, yeah, maybe you should kind of use your first to get some player upgrades, but we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah, so now to round it out, like I mentioned, we will be going to Las Vegas for the first few days of Summer League. What are you looking for? Like, are there which guys, if any, do you kind of have your eyes laser focused in terms of what you would like to see? Because like in general, like again, we've talked about it many times, and we'll probably say it when we talk about it again, right? Like with Summer League, you have to take it with a grain of salt. Sometimes the fit is weird. The practice lengths, right? Like guys don't practice a whole lot with these guys. Like they'll go into games having barely practiced with one another, and the level of talent is not the same, right? Like there's stuff that you'd like to see. Like again, if it's a rookie, do they look like they belong athletically? Do they have certain skill sets that you could see translating into a regular rotation? Things like that. But what are there any guys that you're specifically looking at, laser
Yeah.
focused?
Yeah, I got it.
Aside from the obvious ones.
Yeah, I got a few, right? Like no need to really mention like Coop and Dill, but I think Ace Bailey's number one for me. I need to see the star upside even in the summer league, right? Because that's that was one of the most polarizing players in this entire draft class. Like, and he could end up being the best. Who knows? But another one, Derek Queen for sure. That's a guy that New Orleans traded up to get. So I want to see what they saw in him to trade up, right? Another one I would say is Hansen Yang. I think that's one to watch because that's also another very big trade up for a guy who wasn't even projected to go in the first round. I think Yegor Demon, that's another one. And you can kind of see the trend, right? These are kind of the players that people considered reaches a little bit, maybe. But I need to see what the Nets see in him. And yeah, I'd also probably go Con Knipple as well. Like, I know he's going to be good, base wise, but what does he look like in the summer league where I think he should be better than a lot of the competition already?
Right. Yeah. I think those are, like you said, those are all good picks because, like you said, for most of those are guys where there are a lot of people that have questioned some of those picks. Right. Again, people don't deny that those guys, are solid players, but it's more so like, part of it is the team that they're going to, but also some of their weaknesses, right? Like, say, for a guy like Fears, right? We've mentioned, right? He's an undersized point guard that isn't a great outside shooter. How does that look in the summer league, right? Does it look more of the same? Or, is he going to be like Ryan Dunn, where like for the first stretch of the season, his three is actually falling? Stuff like that. Another guy, Kaman Maluak, right? Just to kind of see, assuming he plays in the summer league, which, seems like he's on the roster, but like, just kind of watching him, right? Considering he was drafted by the Suns, right? They traded for that Houston pick in the KD trade. So presumably they see him as a center of the future. And we know Mark Williams probably isn't going to be a lock to play 50, 60 plus games. So if that's the case, right, you'd like to see what he can do, right? What can he do on both ends of the floor, as a potential future franchise center for the Phoenix Suns. Second round picks, again, as we already mentioned before, I think we mentioned Adu Thiero for LA. He's not going to play because he's got an injury had in Arkansas, but maybe some of these other players, right? Like, say, Rasheer Fleming, since the Suns made all those maneuvers to trade up to try to get him, right? What does that look like, potentially? Or, some of these other guys, that got drafted, like a Kalkbrenner for Charlotte, right? And maybe a couple other guys that you have.
I mean, kind of the similar ones to you. I think the one that's kind of the most intriguing is going to be Rasheer Fleming because they did, trade up a lot to go up and get him, and I think it's a good thing, right? So yeah, can't really complain on that one.
Yeah, I guess Cedric Coward also could that, because
Yeah, that's another good one.
on Janssen part of it for Portland, but Memphis, also they traded up in order to take him. So how does he look, in the summer league, right? I think Jalen Wells, he played in the California Classic or Utah Summer League, can't remember which one, but he played in that and looked pretty good. Obviously, he was hurt to close out the season, but he presumes to have a bigger role, right, with Desmond Bane being gone. But Coward is a guy that they traded up to get who could be a potential future starting two-way wing, for them. Right. So that's a guy where, how does he look? Now, again, he could be one of those casualties where if he doesn't do a lot of on the ball stuff, maybe you're just not going to notice some of his stats, right? Like, if he's just, or maybe they give him too many on ball opportunities and it looks kind of clunky, but then you're like, well, he won't be doing as much of that for Memphis. And that's where, like I said, that's where some of the grain of salt takes kind of have to come in. So you do have to be measured about it because, again, we've seen guys look horrible in the summer league and then they come into the league and look perfectly fine. I remember when we went to Vegas 2 years ago and we saw Wemby and he looked horrific in his first game, right?
Yeah.
Like it got to the point where, like, I'm not going to say people were booing, right? But people were like, what the heck is going on with this guy, right? Because, like, everybody was super hyped, right? I mean, the crowd went nuts when he came into the room. Even when he was like in the
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 tunnel.
tunnel area
Yeah, yeah.
before it even came out, right? Like everybody was hyped, us included, and it's like, what the heck is this? But
Right.
then obviously from that point on, he looked great, and now he's going to be all NBA level guy, assuming he's healthy next year. So
True that.
just just keep all of that in mind.
Yep, you have to every time with summer league. Every time.
Yeah, and then just kind of a quick thing before we kind of close it out, right? We did get the announcement of the new cover star for NBA 2K26, which will be coming out in September. And it looks like it's SGA, right? Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, right? Who continues his hot streak this year of leading the league in scoring, winning league MVP, winning the title and finals MVP. And now he's going to be the cover athlete for the NBA section because I believe they have 3 covers, right? They've been doing that each year where it's like current player, WNBA player, and then former star legend, right? Because I think they have Angel Reese as the WNBA player, and then they got Melo as the NBA legend. But SGA, the streak of success continues, and the recognition continues.
Yeah, deserved for sure. I think we all saw this one coming. Not a fan of the cover itself, but the athlete I do enjoy. That's a pretty dope accolade. Like, and that's everybody's. I'm not gonna say like end game dream, but it is kind of a dream to I think be on the cover of a video game. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, I mean, it's like in the My Career, right? You get
Yeah,
to see it. And it's like, oh, my player is on it, but imagine it happening for real, right? Which
exactly.
is,
Yeah, it's crazy.
for a guy like SGA, like that's got to be a dream come true. Hopefully, the game is good. But
Got
last
it.
year, I think it was Tatum who was the cover athlete because
Yep.
they had a stretch where it normally wasn't the guy coming off of a title. It would kind of go back and forth, right? Like they
Yeah.
had like a couple stretches where it's like LeBron's the cover athlete because they won back-to-back titles, but then it was Durant, right, who would come off an MVP year, right? And then it was like Steph and Harden and AD, right? And then it would be like a stretch where what was it, like Paul George, Kyrie Irving, um, Giannis,
Luca was one of them.
Luca, Booker, right? So it's been different, but the last years it's been the champion, right? Because it was Tatum last year, and then it was SGA this year. But like you said, feels like the covers are starting to lose a little bit of right where the last few years it feels like the cover is a little bit mediocre. But we'll see what happens. But either way, congratulations to SGA for being the cover athlete for 2K26.
For sure.
Yeah, so now to close it out, we did have a couple of polls to go over, right? So the first one related to DeAndre Ayton, right? And the question was, will DeAndre Ayton be great for the Lakers? And the response that we got was 50-50, right? So again, controversial, polarizing player, right? Not in terms of talent, but in terms of all the other stuff, right? Mainly the motor and whatnot. Like, I think both you and I expect him to be good. It's just more so, is him being good enough to make that team significantly better than it was last year? And as of right now, the answer is probably not. They still need other improvements to the roster to be made.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%.
Yeah, and then the other one that we had was, will LeBron stay with the Lakers? And we actually had 100% of the responses being no, right?
Hmm.
Because obviously you've been following that, right? Of course, there's been a lot of talk about what's going on there, right? When he opted in, right? What the statement was, right? And then some of the other stuff. I think both you and I expect him to still probably finish it out with the Lakers, as of right now. Even beyond that, there's other logistics that make some of it tough, like being able to trade, $50 million contract during the season. Not that it's impossible, because we saw it happen with Jimmy Butler, but just as a whole, what team can give up, can exchange $50 million and not feel like that they're gutting their roster? I don't think he's going to get bought out, right? So I think we're kind of assuming he finishes with the Lakers.
Yeah, that's the only logical decision, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, we will be in Vegas, at least for the first few days of Summer League, so look out for that. We'll try to create some content and put that out for all of you. And of course, continue to leave comments on any of our posts on any of our socials. If you want to join in on the polls or leave a comment on anything, go to @the OBT podcast on all of our socials. If you leave a comment on one of our videos, we'll read it and continue to like and subscribe to help our channel grow. Channel's been growing as of late, getting some subs, but we'd like to get some more, so we'd appreciate that. And we'll see you next episode in Vegas.